Okay, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation as well. And it has been weeks of challenge to all of us. And here with online classes, and besides my extension dairy specialist position, I'm also an assistant professor. So I have teaching duties, and it has been a challenge, a good challenge, I think. So what I would like, it was hard to select the topics for today related to dairy management practice, and I'll tell you why. It was a little bit hard because I have that research mindset. I'm not a producer, but I have been working with dairy small ruminants for the last 20 years in different topics and different areas. So what I selected is what I think that's really important for us to be aware of, and in order to choose our management practice and milking practice and everything related to the dairy small ruminants. So I just want to make a knowledge today here, so you can see in that draw that's written San Jordi. San Jordi today is the Valentine's Day in the area in Spain, Catalonia. Can I say that because I'm originally from Brazil, and I'm out of Brazil for I think it's 25 years now, and where 12 years of my life I lived in Spain, where I worked with small dairy ruminants, basically with dairy sheep and dairy goats that you can see in this picture here. So please, you can stop me at any time if you don't understand something that I'm saying or anything. So let's start. I try, as I said, to have a little bit an overview of on areas that I think that is important for us to discuss. For the last 5 years, I have been working here at South Dakota State University with primary dairy cows. And it's interesting to see and for us to know the difference between these species. And it's even interesting when we find former dairy cow producers starting working with small dairy ruminants and having the same strategies. And we need to adapt that. So sheep and goats are not the same as managing cows. So just talking a little bit of the, we need to understand the global milk production, where we are standing at. So of course, cows has that 82% of the world production, where we can see here, let's change the pointer here to be better. So what we can see here that the goats and sheep so accounts for 3.5% of the world dairy production. And when we check the dairy animals, so the head numbers, we can see that sheep and goat accounts for 40% of that dairy herd and flock. So then where we are at. So when we check dairy goats, we can see here that the main areas in the world that dairy goats pops up, we have Asia leading the dairy production on goats, and then we have Africa, where we have those developing countries producing goat's milk, and also Europe with 21%. And then we see that in America, North America, Central America, and South America, the production is still low, but is increasing a lot here in North America. We have an important goat production in Mexico, and when you have some in South America. And then in regards to dairy sheep, so we have pretty much the same picture compared to goats, where Asia is leading the group, and we have Europe, that is has more dairy sheep importance than Africa, for example. And then we know that those Mediterranean countries are really, really important in regards to manufacturing sheep's milk. So then how that relates to United States. So, and then the figures are really, really interesting. And then it's also interesting when I came straight here from Europe, 5 years and a half approx. So I really love sheep's cheese and goat cheese. Goat cheese, I could find some French type ones or French ones, but sheep cheese not. It was really hard. And for the last 2 years, 3 years, it's impressive that the cheeses that I can find in local supermarkets, even in Dakota, that is it's a small state in regards to population. So then when you check these figures here, we can see that it's the data is until 2011, so we don't have update data. And then we have here a decrease in imports, US imports of sheep milk cheese. That is the interesting thing. And that was the economic world crisis, so decrease and then start increasing again. And so we assume that from 2011 to now, so the demand is higher than before. But what is interesting here for us to know that US imported around 60 million pounds of sheep milk cheese. So it means that 40 to 60% of the world exports come to the US, where 40% comes from Italy. Okay, so then when we check our main dairy species in production, so we have dairy cow, 200 billion pounds of milk. We have goat, 278 million pounds of goat's milk. And then we have sheep with 9.4 million pounds of sheep milk. Okay, so total 200 billion pounds of milk. Okay, so that what that is telling us? So it's telling us, in the case as example, that is that the dairy sheep industry here is still growing, is not has not the mark as the dairy goat industry in the US. So we can see that 0.14% of the US milk production, it's related to dairy sheep. So what I want to show you is the following. So if we are producing 9.4 million pounds of sheep milk, and we know the components of that milk, that we can produce almost 2 million pounds of cheese, and we are importing around 60 million of pounds of sheep cheese. So it shows us that we have room to improve, to increase our productions. We have that. So the population in the US are demanding for those type of specialty cheese. Okay, let's say this is for the ones that don't know, the most popular ones that we know here and that we can find here in the US. So we have the famous Roquefort cheese, the blue cheese that we call, that is mainly produced by the Lacon sheep, originally from France, that is high producing use. And then we have the Italian Pecorino Romano cheese that is similar to the Parmesan, so a hard cheese, strong taste. And we have the famous one that is the Manchego cheese, that I love it, from a specific one area in Spain, Castilla-La Mancha, that is the Manchego cheese from the Manchega sheep. Even though all these cheese, they have that origin denomination, you can produce them, you can you can make those cheese in other areas. So it's going to be type. So Manchego type is going to be Pecorino type, or it's going to be Roquefort or blue cheese type. Okay. Constantly, people say, you know, doesn't matter. Let's have goat and sheep, and let's produce milk. And it's interesting to see how we combine those two species. And today was hard for me to choose because I could be talking like 5 hours for dairy sheep and 5 hours for dairy goat. So how I can get that, you know, that I can talk about both. So sheep and goat are not the same. So they are two different species. So, and they have, of course, they have similarities. We can raise them together, but they are different. They are different, and you see. So if your interest is on the dairy side, so we really need to understand what is the mammary gland, how the mammary gland acts. It will be acting the same in sheep and in goats. And so in regards to the production cycle, so you can see that in a goat, so you have a pregnancy, it's around 5 months, lactation from 7 to 10 months, and then usually it's going to depend on your production system. So the dry period is going to be from 2 to 5 months. So pregnancy is going to be when you are breeding, the goat is going to be at the end of the lactation period. In the case of sheep, we can have different systems. We can milk, it's going to depend, of course, this is general. So it's going to depend on the breed that you have, and that is going to change a little bit. So it's going to change your management. This is the same as dairy cows. So depend on the breed that you have, it's going to be less and more, okay? So mammary gland structure. So I consider myself lactation physiologist. So mammary gland structure for me is really important, and all milking strategies, it's related to mammary gland anatomy. So even though the appearance of sheep and goat are similar in the external, so in a function as well, internally will be not. But so the function, so when we talk on the physiologically talking, so we have the support system, that's stromal connective tissue, that's gonna sustain the udder. And the secretory tissue, so what is that? The parenchyma tissue. So in order to produce milk, we need a specific cells to produce milk. That's called alveolus, and the group of those cells is the alveoli. We're not going too in deep in that today, but we need to understand a little bit that structure. So in here, you can see on the right side of this picture, that is it's a goat mammary gland, okay? So here you can see, because this is going to be important later on for our milking strategies. So cows, sheep, and goats, how the mammary gland is structured. So we have the stroma, as I said, connective tissue, that is all in here. And then we have the parenchyma. So then we have here our cells that are responsible to produce milk. Important for us when we are milking is this structure. The gland has a structure here that's called gland cistern, that's responsible for store the milk. And then we have the teat. The teat also has a cistern in here and have particularities here. Teat canal, teat end. We have a muscles to close the teeth. So it's going to be, all these structures are really important to cows, sheep, and goats. However, the way that they function anatomically will be different, and that is gonna change our machine milk settings, for example. It's gonna change our milking procedures. Okay. So let's see the difference. I think that's really interesting. Now, when we see those species from outside, we can now imagine how it's inside. I love doing other dissections and see the difference between the species. So we can see here in the cow, what do we have? The teeth. So that is the teat cistern here. I hope that you guys can see my laser point well. Sometimes, I don't know, the students cannot see that. So here that it's the teat canal. So we have on the side of the teat canal, we have the muscle, the sphincter that we cannot see here. And then we have, here's the gland cistern. Look at that. That is the parenchyma where the milk is produced. We cannot see all the cell at the cellular level. And here is the area where the milk is stored. And then when you see that, you say, wow, in a dairy cow that produces 70 pounds a day, 100 pounds a day. So that is the area that is the milk is stored. It's amazing. Huh? So then we have a goat's udder. So look at the internal structure of the goat. So here's the teat cistern. And then here, let me get back here to show you one thing. So you can see here how from the teat cistern to the gland cistern, you have kind of a narrow space. That is called the cricoid in here. So, and then when we milk dairy cows, that is really important for the preparation to get the milk, because the milk is not circulating here. That is another barrier that a dairy cow has. When we check the dairy goats, you don't see that narrow space in here. So the milk pretty much is circulating from the teat cistern through the gland cistern. And then you check all these cavities here. That is all gland cistern. And you see how that is important when we are milking those species. And then we come to our dairy sheep. On the left side in the picture, you see a meat breed. So you can see here the teeth, really small teeth. So what the meat breeds were not selected for milking. So that's why you see those small teeth. And you see here the gland cistern, really small cavity. Then we come on the right side to a dairy breed where you have a more larger teeth. And the cistern also is larger compared to the meat breed. And then if you compare the three species, you can see that the larger gland cistern area, that is the area that is gonna store the milk produced in the parenchyma area. So we have goat as the largest one, then we have dairy sheep, and then we have cow. So what is that exactly? When you see those images here, so they are ultrasound images. The black areas, it means that is liquid in here. So that liquid in this case is milk. So when we compare the three species, we can see that the cisternal area, where I have here a C, cisternal, is where the milk is stored, okay? It's a compartment, physical compartment where milk is synthesized in the parenchyma, come through the ducts, and you be stored in the cisterns. So cows can store milk just 30% of its production, basically. Goats depend on the breed from 60 to 80, and sheep 50 to 70. And then we have the milk that's in the parenchyma. So in that, inside the cells, the lumen, you know, kind of waiting to come down through the ducts to that compartment to store the milk. So in cows, it's really important the milk that is retained upper in the parenchyma. Okay. So, and then the thing is, so when we check, so we know, and I think that most of you know how milking procedures is important for cows, and we'll see later on, comparing the species. And in the case that for dairy goat and dairy sheep, when we see those gland cisterns, the area that we have to store the milk, so those milking procedures are not that important because we don't need to stimulate the udder as we must in a dairy cow. And then, for example, when we compare, in that case, to understand a little bit the importance of the compartment to store the milk and how that is going to affect our milking practice, we have two breeds of dairy sheep, okay? So we have the Manchega and we have the Lacon. Manchega, it's a local breed from Spain, the one that produced that cheese, the Manchego cheese. And then Lacon, it's a high-producing ewe from France. Okay, Lacon produced more than double of Manchega ewes. Okay, so why is that? It's because it has Lacon ewes, the high-producing one, has more cells producing milk than the Manchega. So what we found is that, if you see here in the picture, look, the really shining part in this picture here, white, is the skin. So you can see here the teeth. So that area is the cistern here, where you have in black, okay? On the Manchega is the same. So you see a smaller area here compared with the Lacon. And then we check the parenchyma. So the amount of milk that's retained there in the parenchyma area, where you have the ducts and where you have the alveoli. So what we found is that both breeds, the high producing one compared to the local one, lower producing ewe, they have exactly the same capacity of milking the parenchyma. But the cistern of Lacon ewes is much bigger. So the productive capacity of these high producing animals, it's related to their capacity of store the milk within the cisterns. That is really important when we are planning our milking strategies. If we are planning once a day milking, for example, every other day milking, and things like that. So how milk ejection happens? So milk ejection, if you are familiar with a dairy cow, so milk ejection is going to be acting in the same ways as a dairy cow, for a dairy sheep and a dairy goat. So we have a positive stimulus when we touch the teeth that goes to the brain, to the pituitary gland, that's going to send one response, that is an efferent signal, to the other. So that response is going to relax the teeth muscles, the teeth canal, the smooth muscles, and then what is going to happen via bloodstream, that's going to be released oxytocin, that is a hormone that we call, I always tell the students and farm employees that oxytocin, for us not forget about that anymore, is the love hormone. So the animals, when they release oxytocin, it's a pleasure feeling. So they like it. They like to be milked when they release oxytocin. It's a welfare hormone. So when oxytocin is released, what is going to happen is that it's going to contract the myoepithelial cells that is surrounding the alveoli to squeeze the milk out of the alveoli as when the milk is produced. In a dairy cow, this is really important. Why? Because our area to retain milk in our gland cistern is small, okay? In a dairy goat, in a dairy sheep, and we're going to see later, of course, ejection is important, but remember that 70 to 80% in the goat, the milk is already in their system. So you are going to collect that 20-30% remaining in the parenchyma. So it means that in many parts of the world, we don't do all the preparation that we do for dairy cows. So we don't do pre-dipping, we don't do stripping, and we don't do that as we do here dairy cows. However, PMOs here, so it's required when you're producing milking to have pre-dipping and dry teats. So that you need to follow and be in accordance with the rules, okay? But we don't need that preparation. Please stop me if you have questions. And so then there is another point that's really interesting and important to understand the dairy species, okay? When we talk about lactation, and last week I had a question from a colleague in another state saying, hey, with the coronavirus problems, I think that I need to dry my dairy goats with months in lactation. So what is going to happen in my subsequent lactation? So then we need to understand one thing. So what is lactation, in fact? So what is the act of producing milk in the mammary gland? We know now the anatomy, we know the compartments, and we know that how important is the gland, the gland cistern in storing that milk. So lactation, we have two important steps: secretion, of course, and then we have the removal of milk, okay? That removal of milk is that removal, the passive removal from the cistern, that compartment that you know now that is inside the gland, okay? So the lactation, it's a balance in secretion and removal, okay? Within the mammary gland, we have local factors acting there. When the gland is full of milk, that's gonna send a sign and say, hey, stop, okay? Then we milk, we extract that milk, and then it's gonna send another signal there and say, hey, start producing milk. That prolactin hormone is gonna act here. And it's kind of you know, so system factors and local factors, system factor and local factors. So if you need to stop lactation, we should not really interfere with the subsequent lactation, because once we stop milking those animals, we are going to have constantly local factors interacting there, and is mostly the mammary gland is gonna stop synthesizing milk, okay? So difference in milk composition. So usually we combine and we say, you know, sheep and goats produce good quality yield cheese. That's true. So milk components are different, even though when you check, for example, proteins in goat and sheep compared to cow, you can see that dairy sheep have more protein content than goat. So goat is pretty much similar to the cow. But even though both species, goat and sheep, they have higher components. They have fat and higher fat and higher protein. So what that means? That means that our cheese yield is going to be higher with the same amount of milk if you use from cows, for example. So then one thing related to milk synthesis that is important, if you milk a goat or if you are thinking and start an operation, is to know that secretion of milk is different between these species. And then when we check the levels of somatic cell counts, what is our somatic cell count? Somatic cell counts are white blood cells. That is going to tell us if one dairy animal has, for example, intramammary infection, what we know as mastitis, okay? So sheep and cows, they have a merocrine type of secretion. So it's really hard to see. I don't know if you guys are seeing really well, but the components of the milk, they are synthesized in epithelial cells, okay? So when they are synthesized, they will be secreted to the lumen, and it's going to be the inside of the globules or etc. In a goat, part of the secretion of components is going to be apocrine. So cell fragments is gonna go also to that lumen together with the milk. So then when we check if somat cell counts, for you that know that it's our health indicator, our good quality milk indicator. So you see that levels in the United States, we have 750,000 for goats, for sheep, sorry, and cows, and we have 1 million to 1.5 million for goats. Why? Wow, if it's an indicator of other health, how can be that? So remember that. Remember that the secretion of goats is different. And not only that, goats have in their milk cell, skin cells, so epithelial cells. And then it's going to change. For example, somatic cell counts in goat can increase, for example, when you have you end up without energy in your place, for example, and you need to milk your goats by hand. So you're going to see the next day that your somatic cell count is kind of 10 times more. Or breeding season, for example, or stress factors, always going to affect that. So I'm saying that because when we check for somatic cell counts and with our automatic systems, the machines to check that, so they will check the DNA content, and all these cell fragments, they have DNA. So it's not that all somatic cell counts really are white blood cells. Other thing that is important for us that are working with small dairy ruminants is that to understand, because I'm seeing that a lot of people are saying, you know, oh, that is for my allergy. I wanna to purchase dairy goat milk. I want camel's milk. Camel's milk has increased a lot in the U.S. and Canada, and we can see here that in goats and camels, the fat globules are much smaller than cows and buffaloes, for example. So that's what that means. That means that when we talk about digestion, it's going to be easier to digest. It's going to go faster. So, and then doesn't allow you to have that those digestive problems that you might have, for example, with a dairy cow. So sometimes you say, yeah, I'm lactose intolerant, so I need goat's milk. So we need to check individual cases, in fact, and see. But one particularity of a dairy goat's milk components is the fat globules. And then there will be another one that is related to allergies. So when we see here in this protein profile that we have the alpha-casein, alpha-S1 casein, so we check all the species, cow, buffalo, sheep, goat, we have 12 kind of percent, so it's a low number. So that study says that the low numbers are better in inducing types of allergies. So it's yes, so goat's milk, you be good for that. Then when milk quality standards, what I just mentioned about somatic cell counts, this is the United States standards. So we have grade A, grade B, so we are, our limit is 750,000 somatic cell counts. And we go to a goat, so should be less than 1 million. And now you know why, okay? Remember that in the milk of dairy goats is not just white blood cells. You have also cell fragments and you have skin cells. So it's why the limits are higher like that. And then here on the right side, you can see these are pictures. I worked for some time doing research in the Spooner Station in Wisconsin that not longer exists for dairy production. But what was interesting there, that after milking, what we were doing, what they did is to freeze the milk. So as we saw before, so dairy sheep and even dairy goat, not as dairy sheep, but seasonal production. So then what do we do if I don't have other jobs or other duties to do? So it's as components in milk are high fat protein, we are able to freeze the milk and use when we are not milking anymore, for example. Okay, so can be used. We can have production all year long. So the milk components were good at least for a year after being freezed. Okay, so when we talk about milking, we need to understand the difference. First, we need different, and we'll see that we need different machine settings. So when we talk about that part, the end part of the teeth of a sheep and goat, for example, they will need different pulsations, because I think that it's really hard. Sometimes you can see goats coming to the milking parlor already leaking, and but sheep is really difficult to see they leaking, because the structure of their teeth sphincter are really strong. Okay, so you need much more pulsations than a cow, for example. And goat, you need less, but they have also a strong teeth sphincter and teeth canal. Okay, we know that cistern in dairy goat and dairy sheep. So dairy goat is around 80% milk is stored in here, and dairy sheep from 50 to 60%. So then when we attach the milking machine, the teat cups, we are getting 75, 80%. That's all gonna depend on the breed. So we need really to study the breed that you have. And you only know the animals that we have if you check that. I mean, their potential. I mean, we need to check what is retaining the other. Usually you have your portion that's machine milking. And then depend on the breed, usually local breeds nowadays, you are going to have that portion of hand machine milking. That's going to be between 10 and 50% of milk. And then you have that residual milk. That nowadays, in really high producing and genetically improved animals, the residual milk is getting less and less and less. Okay, so that is how one thing is the milk fractions in the other, and the other one is the milking partitioning in the other. Okay, and what are things to remember? When milk is synthesized, the fat portion of that, because of its molecular weight, it stays in the duct. Okay, only with milk ejection, when oxytocin is released, it's gonna push that fat content to be released by the mammary gland. So it's really important to give the time to oxytocin be released in order to have our fat content. If you milk those animals or take samples, for example, you strip the sheep, goat, and you check that for the milk components, you see that fat content, you are going to get around 1%, 2%, okay? When milk ejection didn't happen. And goats is the same. Okay, milking machine settings here, as I mentioned. So you can see cows, we usually have 45, 60 pulsations per minute. So we can have the milk coming out of the udder really easily. Sheep, we need much more. They have a more strong teat sphincter, teat canal. And goat is in between and is stronger than a cow. And then things here that I want to mention. When I came to the US over 10 years ago to work at Langston University, Kika de la Garza, it surprised me that they were milking every 12 hours, the dairy goats. And I said, but why you are milking every 12 hours? And then it happened to other producers as well. So we have that dairy cow mentality. No, we need to milk every 12 hours. No. Now you know that the cistern compartment where the milk is retained in the udder, it's bigger. So we don't need to have the 12 hours intervals. And we'll see later that we can even milk once a day dairy goats, for example, even dairy sheep we can, okay? The cisternal compartment will change a little bit its capacity according to breed, okay? For dairy cow, we have that, I mean, we're not talking about dairy cow today, but it's pretty much standard, the cisternal capacity. But also checking the cisternal capacity of a dairy cow, we can have other milking strategies in places, for example, that you have heat stress, that you need to milk your cows once a day, for example, okay? Other thing that's interesting here, if you are aware about milking routine for a dairy cow, you know that it's a requirement for inspection, and I assume in most states. I'll tell you about South Dakota because it changed a little bit. So we must pre-dip the teeth, strip, dry, right, attach. It's not a requirement to do post-dip, even though most farmers, they do, because we know what mastitis is and etc. And we want the best for our mammary glands. So in the case of sheep and goats, back in Europe, for example, we don't do that. When these animals, dairy sheep and dairy goats, come to the milking parlor, we just attach the teat cup, okay? First, because their bedding are cleaners because of the size of the animal, so management is different compared to a cow. So those animals are coming to the milking parlor cleaner and don't need that. What yes we do is post-dip here in the United States. So for the last 5 years, as I mentioned, so I basically work with dairy cows producers, but for the last 3 years I'm working with one goat producer here north of Brookings, and they do and as is a requirement for inspection, so they do the pre-dipping, they dry, and they do some time to time, depend. They do a CMT, but anyway, the milking routine is pre-dip, dry, attach, and post-dip. Just the whole message here is, if you were a dairy producer before, so settings are not the same for dairy goat and dairy sheep, and this is things that we need to understand, okay? Milk price. So we know that we have a better yield, cheese yield, for example, with our dairy sheep milk. So there is just a number. I cannot assure that nowadays with the milk price changing a lot, at least on the dairy cow side, we have a low price right now. I really don't know if that is interfering with dairy sheep and dairy goats milk. But we can see that compared with a dairy cow, it's much higher per pound of milk produced. Things that is important in management, we are thinking what I'm going to tell them related to management. So in dairy cows, we stressed a lot about colostrum feeding. So it's the same, it's exactly the same for dairy goat and dairy sheep. So colostrum for the lambs and the kids are really important, okay? Because those animals, the ruminants, they have what it's written here, epithelial chorial placenta. So it means that there is an interhumal distance between what is the maternal endothelial cells to the fetal endothelial cells. So it's not like us human that moms will transfer that immunoglobulins, means defense, immune defense, to the babies. So it's why we really need to provide to our does and lambs the colostrum. And then you need to talk to your veterinarian or other producers. So what is the best strategy for that? Okay. And colostrum is not only important for the offspring in terms of transfer of immunoglobulin. It's also important because it has a lot of bioactive. So, and you can see here, so growth factors, hormones, etc. It's really important. It's really important in the protection of that intestinal microbiota. So to protect the intestinal mucosa of the animals in order to avoid the microorganisms, pathogens, bacteria to go in those animals. So it's really important. So you can have several strategies, but that is just an example of one. So exactly the same as we do for dairy cows, so dairy sheep and dairy goats. The first 2 days, milking, 2 to 3 days, that milk is colostrum, okay? Usually the first milking is where we have our high content of immunoglobulins. And then what we can see here that we have a great transfer of immunoglobulins is in the first hours after being born. And around 24 hours, the intestinal, the enterocytes that we call in here, they are open before 24 hours and they're closing after that, successively, gradatively. But so, and the black dots here, it's representing the immunoglobulin. So after 24 hours, so the immunoglobulins cannot enter anymore, okay? So it's why it's really important. And not only that, is what I tell the dairy producers. So we know that colostrum feeding is gonna affect all the productive life of those animals that you are keeping at the farm as replacement. Okay, so important in dairy goat and dairy sheep, that is related to, that has at the economically sensitive point. So we have from one side the animal performance, so milk yield, other health, and it's dependent on the production. So lamb kid survival, suckling, you goat cooling rate, genetic improvement system, and then we have on the other side the machine milkability. Milking times depend on the size. In Europe, you have large goats and sheep dairy, so labor is really important. So we cannot afford to have ewes or those with mammary gland that has horizontal teeth placement, for example. Milk routine, frequency, and milk quality. So we have been studying from the last 20 years how we can genetically modify the mammary morphology of our dairy sheep and dairy goats, okay? On the dairy cow side, we have pretty much that standard and genetically improved, okay? So one of the biggest problem for dairy sheep is the teeth placement. So you can see here on the left side, so we scored others and we tried to breed those animals trying to find the best morphology that you be not only optimum to the milking machine, but it's going to be optimum too for those that have a double reading system that for lamb survival, for example. So for teat cup placement, so it's all called, we relate to a cow's udder. So it's this one where teats are placed vertical, okay? It seems that is not anything, it's not a novelty in here, but it's those type of other shapes as where we are commonly find in our flocks. So, and then you have a lot of problems at the time to teat cup placement, for example, and not only that. So remember that the employee and milking time is really important. So if I have a milk retaining that udder here and I need to do machine hand stripping, it's going to take more time for me to finish that milking. And then we need to So how much my ewe is producing? Is producing 2.5 kilos, 3 kilos, so 6 pounds, 7 pounds. So it's worse to me to stay 1 minute or 2 minutes more per animal in order to hand strip them, machine hand strip. So probably not. So those things we need to select. So here is just the examples of that. And then interesting fact here is when we related mammary morphology with mastitis incidence. So as we have those horizontal teeth position, we have more probability of having mastitis, okay? And if we have more vertical type of teeth placement, we have less probability of having mastitis, just because we are not milking that animal to that full potential, for example. So we need to remember how is inside the udder and then to adapt our routine or even our selection programs, okay? Choosing the right goats. Goats is the same. So depend on the breed, they use that saggy arms in here in order to not have any milk accumulated at the end of milking. And you have different size, so you try always to be not below the hock size with the others, and etc. So so that one will be the one favorable to milking machine, that you can see here that you're going to have less stress on your teeth. But that is, there are many details related to that. That is just like a brush up on the what is important, what we are looking, what we should look, because we are not relating really that with our productive potential, with our other health, and it's all related, okay? So we know, now we know how the udder is inside, we know the problems that external morphology can bring to us. So then how we do with milking, milking practice. In the 3 species, milking practice, what I'm saying, or strategies is, for example, we milk twice a day, okay? So can we milk once a day? So, and then check in several species. So in dairy cows, no. It's going to depend on the size of the cistern compartment, but the loss in milk is going to be huge. And we know that's related to the anatomy of the udder, the mammary gland. When you go to sheep, you might, and then in goats, you have less yield losses in milk production. That is related with that internal capacity of the animal. So in Europe, there are many places that are milking goats once a day, because then you have time to do other things. If you are cheese making, so you have time for that. So the losses in milk throughout the lactation is around 15%, sorry. Another management strategy will be after the peak of lactation, so you go to once a day. You can do twice a day until peak of lactation, and then once a day throughout the lactation. So your losses is going to be less, but that needs to be studied. So then another strategy, knowing now how the animal acts and not. So another strategy for dairy goat that has been used is what we call extended lactation. It means that we are not going to have 1 kid per year anymore. So we are going to have 1 kid every 2 years. So we keep milking that animal. So in the white data here on this graph is the animals that were under extended lactation, and in yellow the ones that had that 10 months, that 40 something weeks of lactation. Then we have the dry period, and the second lactation was bred, and then the second lactation. What is interesting to see that the difference between the 2 groups were not significant. So you have yield losses, but it's really minimum. So it depends. So if your management strategies, you are not interested in having in having your dough kit, so you can do extended lactation, okay? Oops. I know it's thinking here, internet has problems. I'm sorry about that. It's thinking the computer. Anyone has any questions that I can help with?
We had a couple for you. The first one is there a grade B for dairy goats? And if so, what are those standards?
For the standards for the milk?
Yes.
So for the sheep, yes, it uses a grade B, and for the goats as well.
Okay. The second question we have is, how does changing the type of feed that the animals are receiving change the taste of the cheese or milk?
So in regarding to nutrition, so I cannot tell much about that. I have not been, as I said before, so I'm not a sheep or a goat producer. So I have studied, but specific things. So I know that depend of the pasture or grazing that you have, you might interfere. But that I will leave to other colleagues that are expert on feeding to answer that.
Okay, thank you.
But I can try to find the answers for you guys and share that. Okay, so continue in here. So it's just strategies, and we need to know. So know your animals, know the capacity of your animals. So it's really important to see if you change from twice a day to once a day, if that is answering your expectations, and know that it's the same for dairy cow or dairy sheep. So the animals that have more lactations will be producing more milk than the first lactation animals. So if you change to once a day, for example, second, the third lactations animal, you have more losses in production than it's the first lactation animal. So you need is what you have in here. So the first lactation, first parturition, first lactation animals, if you change to once a day, you have you be producing less than the multiples one, or more lactations. Okay. Then one thing that I don't know if I'm running out of time, but I really want to stress here that's the project that I'm working with the farm here in South Dakota, and I worked before in Spain, is that the impact of mastitis, inflammation and infection of the udder on our cheese making. Remember, okay, for goats, it's a drinkable milk, but sheep, it's really important that cheese production. We know mastitis. Mastitis can be clinical, then you see the clear signs of the disease, and you have the subclinical one. Subclinical ones is when you don't see it, but they have it. And not only of that, depending on the pathogen, we are going to have no change in somatic cell count or protein level or fat level, but it's going to affect the cheese yield later on. So it's really important to know your enemy. So check your animals, check the plates, okay? Because you are going to have a lot of effects on the animal health and also on the human health, because you have a poor quality product, okay? And then if you have more mastitis, you need to use more antibiotics, and then it's also a risk for antibiotic resistance. So as I mentioned before, this is our pictures from the farm here in South Dakota. What do? They pre-dip, they dry, attach, and post-dipping are really important in order to prevent the intramammary infections. Also, CMT is good to use. It's a great indicator, a really cheap indicator of other health. However, CMT, we just need to control when we use at end lactation where we have less yield and more milk components concentrate. So it might give you a wrong data. Here, what I want to show you is that in case of goats, when we check the infected glands and only one gland infected in terms of somat cell count didn't change. So it means that, again, if you have a level of somat cell counts, doesn't mean that you don't have problems, okay? So, and sheep and goats are acting a little bit different what is dairy cows. And here in sheep, and then yes, you have one increase, but when you have 1/2 only, pretty much it's somat cell count might not change, and we're going to see in another table here. So that is when we think about cheese making. How is that important? Because when we check in sheep, for example, here, somat cell counts between infected and non-infected, for example, you have a difference. When you check the levels in here, we are talking about 500,000 level. So it was different, but this is within the level, okay? But what is interesting to see is that the other thing that's interesting here that I need to say is those negative staphylococcus, CNSs, coagulase negative staphylococcus that were the species that we found in this project. So actually they are subclinical type of mastitis. So you don't have clinical signs, okay? So you are selling your milk, you are producing your cheese with the milk with those coagulase negative staphylococcus. When you go and check, it changed a little bit protein, but slightly. So here, for example, in one breed, Lacombe didn't change, in fact, but for Manchega change, casein, it's pretty much infected or not, it didn't. So when I say uninfected, that was free of infection, okay? And infected had the coagulase negative staphylococcus. The message, what I want to show to you here is, if you are interested in producing cheese, okay, so we have RCT, is rennet clotting time, and CF, curd firmness, that are parameters really important for cheese making. So you can see here that the clotting time, the coagulation, it's really longer when you have animals infected with subclinical type of mastitis. And the firmness of the curd is really low. So it affects. The thing is that we always say, and I should not say that, but dilution is the solution. As we are producing high amounts of milk, so we have health animals with non-health animals. So all the milk mixed together, so it's going to be good for your cheese making. So now, if you have a small farm and you are producing your own products, that is going to be an issue. So we really need to check that. We need to know what we have. Then another detail related to intermammary infections, that is the work that I have been doing here with the dairy producing in South Dakota, is the use or not of dry-off therapy. So in dairy cows is really famous and in a way of saying that we use blanket therapy. So we treat all cows at the dry-off in order to prevent intermammary infections in the subsequent lactation. So it's a prophylactic use, okay? But more and more, we have been asked to use selective type of dry-off. That means what? We check every animal, and if they have subclinical mastitis, why I say subclinical? Because clinical, you know. So you see the abnormal milk, so you know that's clinical, is going to treat. At the dry off, you are not seeing anything. Animals, they are healthy, others are healthy, and milk, it's okay. You are checking somatic cell count, it's okay. You are checking protein level and fat level, they're okay. Okay, when I check individual goats, I can select the ones that will be receiving treatment. And treatment means antibiotic therapy. So what was really interesting here is that I'm going to just show that, and the table is going to be for you to check later. And please, if you don't understand anything, contact me. You have my email at the end. What I want to show you is that at the end of lactation, we had over 50% of the animals with high somatic cell counts and subclinical type of mastitis, okay? When these animals start the subsequent lactation, the next lactation, these animals drop to 13%. So at the dry off, the animals that show subclinical type of mastitis were treated with antibiotics, and the next lactation, they were only 30%. That is the stage of the animals are more prone to intramammary infections. So it's not new in here that animals that have subclinical type of mastitis, they had increased somatic cell counts to a higher level, 10 millions of somatic cell counts. So it's not new in that. That are the pathogens that we found. So we found the staphylococci species, Staphylococcus aureus here you can see, and then you can see here with Staphylococcus aureus how it goes up to more than 10 million. So it's why it's good to check what you have in your herd or flock. And that's the same that we did back in Spain. What we did is we treat the animals that had the subclinical type of mastitis, and we had a 78% of cure rate in the next lactation. But that we need to consult with your veterinarian and find the best approach to use. That I had really good results using dry therapies with dairy goats and dairy sheep, and I think it is effective, but not on a blanket way. It should be on a selective way. We should start changing that. But dry therapy, as we do in dairy cows, is not only important to prevent the mammary gland of having intramammary infections. It's also important in preparing the mammary gland to produce milk. The mammary gland needs that resting phase. So we have in the mammary gland, we are going to have a rate of growing cells, and we are going to have a rate of apoptotic cells, or it means program that cells. So cells will die, okay, and will regenerate. So it's really important. So you can see here fast on late lactation or involution, means before parturition, as when we have a high rate of growing cells, what is going to be really important for our level of productions in the next lactation. So if we combine the treatment and we combine the right period of rest, the mammary gland, that will be perfect for your producing animals. And we can see here too the and how the impact, and again the data is going to be for you there, that when we compare days of dry period of 60 days versus 30 days to none, okay? So you have a huge impact if you are working on goats with the weight of your kits. You have a huge impact of your immunoglobulin content, and of course immunoglobulin is protein, so you can see here the impact. So dry period, it's important. Then we are getting towards the end here, And I just want to remind you the 5 freedoms of welfare. That's important. And mastitis, our milking procedures, our milking practice, everything related to those animals needs to be in accordance with welfare standards, meaning, you know, they need to be free from hunger and thirst, discomfort, pain, injury, disease. Remember, pain, injury, and disease is related to mastitis and other disease. And they need to be free to express their behavior. And with their behavior, we can also check how the animals are. And we'll see in here, for example, that's really interesting. I do a lot of cow signals, and with sheep and goats are the same. So sheep, they talk to their ears and eyes. It's so, and it is amazing how they have a study that they show pictures of other sheep or people that they know, and they check and they became calm, okay? And for the goats is the same. The goats talk with their voice. So, and they talk to the others. And why all is that important? Because those species, they can interact with the others. So if one feels fear or stress, they will be interacting with the other. So, so it's important to us to be able to recognize that. Related to management, I would like to tell you about the FAMACHA system. So goats and sheep are grazing animals. So the parasitism problem in those species are high. So, and we have one easy way to check that is the FAMACHA system that was going to check, in fact, is the anemia level. It's a simple card, a small card that you can check the ocular conjunctive. If it's healthy, it's the borderline, depend on the color. We just need to be a little bit of caution when the animal is lactating, okay? So it's better to cross-check with fecal values, for example, or anemia and PCV values. It's really important that too. This is just pictures of the farm here that I'm working with them. They have Toggenburg goats. They're doing a wonderful management system. And the problem that we have here in South Dakota that I hope that you guys don't have in your places is that we don't have where we have a lot of interest in producing goat's milk, but we don't have where to ship that milk, in fact. So it's really hard for the producer in here at this point, even though the interest is it's increasing. They just updated the milking parlor. So the producing system is not that complicated. Sheep and goats are really easy animals to manage, to handle, and it's really fun to be around of them. And one thing that I would like you, if you are interested in producing dairy sheep milk, last year I have the great opportunity to be in Ohio and visit that. So you have their link here. They started in 2011, not a long time ago, and they have a successful dairy business there. They are producing their own cheeses, and they cannot with the demand because many places are demanding their cheeses, and they don't have enough milk to produce. And they were not producers from before, so they start just, you know, like this, learning and getting acquainted with how is the small dairy type of production. And it's interesting that the months that they are not producing sheep cheeses, they buy cow's milk from neighbors and then produce cheeses as well. And then lastly, I think that it will be really important for you guys. Equica de la Garza, American Goat Institute in the United States is one of the largest and most important goat facilities in the world. So the resources that they have, it's speechless. So they have, for the ones interested in dairy goat production, they have a beautiful and really well done handbook with pictures, all the procedures of everything. Here is the contact information. It's not that expensive, and I think that for you that want to start the business, it'll be fantastic to have. For you that it's already a producer, you answer many of your questions. So I have a few take-home messages related to that, things that I just need to point out. So remember, physiologically, cows, sheep, and goats are pretty much the same. So they have the same hormones related to milk production, but mammary gland structurally and anatomically speaking is different, and we need to understand that for our milking strategies, for our milking machine settings. Colostrum is important in all these species. Somat cell count, we need to understand the somat cell count. And in regards to the other question, the question and the level, you need to check for grade A and grade B, so the PMO standards in your state. That is important to check. So what are the milk inspectors checking in your state? That will be important, okay? But the levels in somat cell count will be pretty much the same. Remember that we have pathogens in there that cannot be seen, and we have high incidence of what we call subclinical type of mastitis. That is going to affect your milk. If you are thinking to produce cheese in your own property, check that, because it might be interfering in your cheese properties as yield, flavor, curd, firmness, etc. And not only that, it might be interfering also in the yield of your milk. So you might be producing less milk that you're supposed to be producing, okay? Selective dry treatment, it's effective, it works, but you need to check with your veterinarian. And the milking management, so milking frequency should be adapted to the milk production level as well, and the other morphology. So you need to know the animals that you have. Okay, so that is my email here. If I can be of any help, please contact me. I might not have all the answers, as nutrition, for example, is not my strength at all, but I have a few people, my mentors, my colleagues, that they are experts on nutrition, and I can have you guys, connecting with them. And again, so Langston University is a good resource, and most of them are nutritionists and can answer all these questions. So it's what I have for today. I'm sorry, I think that I talked too much, and I hope that was useful for all of you.
Oh, thank you so much. You've given us a lot of really good information. So we did have a couple of questions for you. The first is, how can you tell when they have mastitis without doing the somatic cell count?
So one good approach is the CMT, the California Mastitis Test that we use for dairy cows. That I have it in one picture, and I can send if the person want to contact me later on, and it's a really easy tool to use. And also, but then we need to study a little bit, but on-farm testing, it can be used to using eggs incubator, for example. You can check, and do your own plates. But that is it's a different thing, but it's not that complicated.
Thank you. The next question is, do you know if the timing of feeding the animals affects the milk production when you're milking?
That is gonna, every place is gonna have its own management. What we did is, for example, there are operations that they feed some concentrate at the milking parlor that it's helps with milk ejection, for example, and so the animals, you know, stay calm and they like it. And I think it's going to depend more than the time that you feed. It's going to depend the quality of your feed, your quality of your forage, and then if you have dairy animals, so the protein content that you are having that forage and also your concentrate is going to be really important here. And even for dairy cows, because when you see about feeding time, so we are talking about their circadian clock. So the animals will respond better. It's going to depend. Early in the morning, you know, early in the afternoon.
Okay.
So I don't have exactly answer for that. What we used in Spain, it was they went, we milked in the morning, they went grazing for 6 hours, and then when they came back, they have the feed, and so when they came back for grazing, because the thing is, depending if you're grazing or you're feeding them with concentrates, for example, before grazing, when they go out to graze, they are not grazed as they should. So it depends on the management system that you have.
Right. The last question is personal to you, I think. They asked, what breed of sheep do you prefer cheese from?
Me, personally, I like cured cheese, aged cheese. So I love the Manchego type of cheese that you have months of aging. I really like that. I love the combination of milks. They have a sort of type of Manchego cheese, hard cheese that's made of goat, sheep, and cows. Is delicious. And I do love the Lacon, the Roquefort cheese. That will be more on the soft side, kind of. I really like it.